This weekend, the twice impeached, disgraced ex-president Donald Trump held a rally in Georgia, one of the states that helped clinch his defeat. In the 10 months since the election, Trump has not wavered from his thoroughly debunked claims that the results in Georgia were fraudulent and he was really the winner. That's false. Speaking at the Georgia National Fairgrounds on Saturday, Trump made it clear he plans to campaign not just on this platform of the last stolen election, but also explicitly on putting in place people who are willing to steal the next one for him.
They attacked and cheated on our elections. And they did it right here in Georgia also, right here in Georgia. Now the people of Georgia must replace the rhinos and weak Republicans who made it all possible.
This is the number one continuing threat to American democracy, the very real possibility that Donald Trump, or potentially someone else, but right now it's Trump, could claim fraud, as Trump did in 2020, and essentially try to steal the election. And that, crucially, Republicans in positions of power up and down the hierarchy would enable him to do it. Now, he came close to that nightmare last year, really close. It only thwarted thanks to a handful of folks, one of them Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who is refusing to bend to Trump's will. But he's now being primaried with Trump's support. Before we find ourselves back in that situation again, we have to make actual changes to fortify the defenses of our election systems. Rick Hasen's one of the nation's top experts on election law, who's been thinking about studying and proposing those necessary changes. In fact, he just published a paper titled Identifying and Minimizing the Risk of Election Subversion and Stolen Elections in the Contemporary United States. He's also founder of the Election Law Blog, a professor of law and political science at the University of California, Irvine, where he serves as the co-director of the Fair Elections and Free Speech Center. And he joins me now. Rick, you have been very, very focused on this. I share your concern and focus on it, and we've been pretty focused on it. First, have you gotten more or less concerned as time has passed between January 6th, particularly, and now?
Oh, I've gotten much more concerned. First of all, we've learned a lot more about what happened behind the scenes January 6th. We learned how Vice President Pence was urged to essentially just declare Trump the winner based on a false claim that there were 7 states with alternative slates of electors because of irregularities in elections. None of this stuff was true. But Vice President Pence stood up. You mentioned Raffensperger. He stood up. People who were actually in power and who had to make decisions stood up, and we were able to withstand what Trump was throwing at the election system last time. But now, over the last 9-10 months, as Trump has convinced millions of his supporters that the last election was stolen, and he's trying to replace those who stood up to him with those who either buy into this false claim or pretend to buy into this false claim, I have much less confidence that we'd be able to withstand the same kind of thing come 2024.
Yeah, you write about addressing this in a legal sense, right? So what are the things we can do legally, changes we can make to essentially fortify free and fair elections, to defend them from malefactors like Trump? And I want to just read a passage here and have you describe it. The kinds of legal changes I advocate run the gamut. Things like ensuring we have paper ballots that can be recounted by hand, conducting official risk-limiting audits to check the validity of a vote count, removing from that power those who play essentially a ceremonial role in affirming election results, making sure that there are streamlined processes for bringing bona fide challenges in elections that are actually problematic. Those last two strike me as really important. One of the things we learned last time was that there are all these people involved in passing the baton, and there are all these different pressure points. And then the question of like what if something really did go wrong? How would you challenge it was sort of unclear. And it seems like you're saying we need to streamline one and clarify the other.
Well, the thing about the presidential election is that it's so different than every other election we run in the United States, right? It's run across 50 states in 10,000 different jurisdictions. And then even once the people vote, there are a whole bunch of steps that have to happen before the full ceremonial counting of the Electoral College votes happens. Each of those is a place of weakness in a system that doesn't rely upon norms and the rule of law. So we've relied on the fact that people were going to do the right thing. They weren't going to lie about the outcome of the election. If you're going to have the potential that people are going to lie, you're going to need to have that paper to back it up. You're going to need to have rules that make it harder to engage in false claims that the vote total was what it was. But legal change won't be enough. We also need to have a political strategy because it's not clear that these changes are going to come either from Congress or from the states and that they're going to be enough next time.
The big federal law here is the Electoral Count Act, which was actually passed in 1887. It was 10 years after one of the most contested elections in American history in 1876, in which the person with less votes in the popular vote actually got to be president of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes beating Samuel Tilden. And the Electoral Count Act is a mess and kind of, I keep saying, the Chekhov's gun of this tragedy, which John Eastman centered on. I mean, the famous Eastman memo is him basically saying, here's how we could use the gaps in this law and its tension with the 12th Amendment to get our guy in. How important is it to change that?
Well, I think it's essential. And I'm hoping that after the January 6th commission goes through and sees exactly what happened the last time around, that they're going to propose some changes this time around. But you have to understand that John Eastman's strategy, at one point, he declares that the Electoral Count Act's unconstitutional, and the 12th Amendment just allows the vice president to do whatever he wants. So again, law, making legal changes, it's so important. It's my number one priority to push this over the next few years. But legal change alone is not going to protect American democracy. We're going to have to be ready for mass peaceful protests. We're going to have to be ready to organize civil society, the kinds of things I never expected we'd have to talk about in the United States.